the Homelessness and Poverty Committee of the Los Angeles City Council. We are joined, my name is Marquise Harris Dawson. I represent the 8th District and I'm chair of this committee. Joined by the Vice Chair of the committee, Councilmember Jose Huizar, also Council Members Price and Bonin. I don't, Mr. Clerk, see any public comment cards in front of me. I'm going to open public comment now. General public comment. Oh, there. Who knew? And this is item 1. All right. So general public comment. We'll begin the meeting with. I have 2 cards. One from Glenna Wilson and another from Jim Mazzarella. If you can approach the podium, and you'll have a minute to speak. The podium's right here with the mic on it. Good afternoon.
Maybe you can use this. Does it stretch out that far? Stretch out that far? Ma'am, if you want to just step over here and then I'll make a call to somebody. That should pick you up.
Good afternoon, Mr. How is this? It's kind of low. It's really low. I'll wait till you guys.
So you should go ahead and give your public comment. We can hear you. Fine.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee. My name is Glenna Wilson, and I actually wanted to make my comment after the meeting started. But at any rate, I'm a registered nurse, retired registered nurse, and I'm very concerned about the homeless situation. I am an advocate, and I would propose, in case it has not been suggested, that the neighborhood council should include officers from local schools, nurses, business persons in the area, law enforcement, representatives from churches, synagogues, and parishes. And this way that you can get a well-rounded idea of what's going on in the neighborhoods which are affected. Oftentimes people in the neighborhood council, they may not have a hands-on approach to the homeless population. So this is my suggestion. All the other comments are later, if possible.
Thank you. Welcome. Lhasa. That's your time. Your time's up. Thank you. All right, Mr. Clerk, can you read item 1 of the special agenda into the record? And we're happy to be joined by the one and only member Gil Cedillo.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just for clarification, you want the special item
Yes.
to be read into the record? Okay. Item number 1 on the special agenda is a motion by Council Members Harris, Dawson, and Wesson relative to the process of incorporating inputs from neighborhood councils, including establishing a homeless advocate program as the city increases its investment in addressing homelessness. This item is also referred to the Rules, Election, Intergovernmental Relation, and Neighborhoods Committee.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I believe we have someone from Dunn to provide us a verbal report on this matter. It's our community college trustee, Mike Fong, and in this capacity, part of the leadership of our Department of Neighborhood Empowerment.
Thank you, Council Member, and good afternoon, honorable Council Members. On behalf of the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, we'd like to provide some thoughts and feedback on this motion, and thank you so much, Councilmember Marquise Harris Dawson, for your leadership and efforts in reaching out to the neighborhood councils and how neighborhood councils can be part of the resolution of the homelessness issue. As part of the neighborhood council system, we have a budget advocate system where neighborhood councils have an opportunity to have a designated representative on a particular issue. Going forward, we've had a lot of elections on the neighborhood councils in the past couple months, and in the next month or so, the rest of the city, regions 9 to 12, will have their neighborhood council elections. As neighborhood councils get onboarded and seated and sworn in, and a number of the council members have been at the swearing-ins of a number of the neighborhood councils, we have asked each neighborhood council to designate a homelessness advocate liaison to work with the city council on this very important issue. In that manner, we also propose to have a regional system. In the neighborhood council system, there are 12 regions throughout the city, and to have a system where you have 2 regional representatives from the areas, each of the 12 areas, to have a core group of 24 liaisons to make up the homelessness advocate program. And we would also try to get a website and leadership within the neighborhood council system to work closely on how neighborhood councils can play a bigger role in working closely with the city council on this very important issue.
Excellent. Thank you. What are some of the other issues that you have where there are designees that convene citywide around?
Thank you, Council Member. Some of the other issues that neighborhood council members work on are DWP reform, planning land use issues, sustainability, emergency preparedness, and we also have regional neighborhood council alliances. So there are 12 different alliances in the neighborhood council system, but in terms of the policy areas, there are planning and land use, sustainability, emergency preparedness, and DWP.
And how would you rate attendance and participation on these kind of committees?
They vary. Some of the alliances have maybe 10 to 12 people, and then others have, in the neighborhood council budget advocates, usually have about 20. The Emergency Preparedness Alliance, we just started that with Commissioner Len Schaefer, and we've had attendance of as high as 40 or 50 neighborhood council members.
Excellent, thank you. Are there questions on this matter, members? Seeing none, thank you, Mike. We'll go to comments on this issue.
Thank you.
You'll hang out for a minute in case something comes up.
Perfect.
So we have one public comment on this one. General Jeff.
Thank you, Chair. My name is General Jeff. I am the chair of the Skid Row Neighborhood Council Formation Committee. When we started our effort, it was in the summer of 2014. Back then, this very committee, Homelessness and Poverty Committee, did not yet exist. The C3 solution did not yet exist. CES was in its infancy stages, and none of the comprehensive homeless strategies actually existed then. So we're very excited that there's this new energy towards focusing on homelessness. The Homelessness Advocate Program will not only be a significant part of the Skid Row Neighborhood Council once it officially comes all the way online, but it will definitely be a priority matter. And so we look forward to trying to not only working on homelessness, but also working with the Homeless Advocates Program even prior to us officially becoming the Skid Row Neighborhood Council. Thank you.
Great. So if there is no objection, we'll adopt this matter and move forward. And this, we adjourn the special meeting at this moment. Excellent. So we're adjourned in the special meeting, and then we go into our regular meeting. Excellent. Can Mr. Clerk, can you read item number 1 of this regular meeting into the record?
Yes, sir. Item number 1 on the regular meeting is an item that was continued from May 11, 2016. It's a CAO and CLA report relative to funding options to address homelessness, including the steps necessary to place a measure on the next general or city election ballot to raise new revenue needed to address homelessness. This item was also referred to Rules, Elections, Intergovernmental Relations, and Neighborhoods Committee.
So we have representatives from the CAO and CLA to make a quick presentation on this.
Good afternoon, Yolanda Chavez with the CEO's office. I thought what we may do, since the report before you summarizes the additional information that you requested at your May 11th meeting, if you would like, I could summarize the responses and then, of course, answer any additional questions you may have, along with the CEO and CLA team.
Please, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I will start with those responses that I think would be the easy issues and leave the chart on the back for the end, because I think you'll have a number of questions related to the proposed tax rate per median home. So let me first start with one of the issues that you discussed at length at your last meeting, and that was whether general obligation bonds or GO bonds could be used for anything other than brick and mortar. And again, the city attorney has confirmed that they can only be used for capital or brick and mortar, and so the proceeds from GO bonds cannot be used for operating expenses or rental vouchers. You also asked, there was a question about whether the GO bonds would have a sunset date that would be connected to the point-in-time count. And I think the question that we're trying to ask here is if whether once the city has authority to issue housing bonds, whether at some point, if we have solved our homeless and housing problem, you could basically stop issuing bonds. And the answer is yes. So if we go through 10 years and issue $500 million in bonds, and the council decides that maybe there's a new funding source and no need to issue additional bonds, you can stop at any point. Of course, we do have to pay the debt on those bonds that have been issued. You also asked about why is it that LA Unified can buy iPads with their GO bond proceeds, but the city is limited in terms of its use for capital. So the response is basically the state constitution provides an exception to school districts as well as community college school districts that allows them to purchase furnishings and equipment with their proceeds, whereas in the state constitution, it only allows municipalities to use their proceeds for capital. Okay. Let's see. So with that, let me go to the chart in the back, because I think the chart responds to some of the other questions that you had. And so I just want to go through some of the assumptions here. So it's the attachment to the report that is labeled Projected General Obligation Bonds Tax Rate per Median House. So the first column there is the projected, and let's just say this is basically the tax bill, right? The property tax bill per median, and we're using the median house valued at about $327,900 per fiscal year. And as you know, the county issues property tax bills twice a year in November and March. So the total column actually represents the projected totals per fiscal year. So the first column outlines the city's obligation for our existing GEO bonds, the police facilities bond, the library bond, the zoo animal shelters, etc. I'm going to leave the new housing bonds till the end to explain that column. The other two columns answers the question of what the obligation is for property owners, for the LA Unified School District and the LA Community College District, and then of course the total. So if we go to the new housing bonds columns, if the city decided to approve a bond measure and we started to issue bonds, and I want to explain that the way the program would work is that the city would issue bonds annually based on the projects to be funded that year. Right? So we would not be issuing the total amount of our authority in any one year, but it would be based on the projects that would be funded in that year. Okay? So I want to note here that in our projections, it's very prudent and conservative. So it's based on a tax, an interest rate of 5%, which is a little high at this point, but we wanted to give you the most conservative estimate and not say that, for the first year, the tax bill for a medium home would be about $2237 when it could be higher. So we wanted to give you prudent estimate. The other thing I want to note that the reason why the payment would start in 2019 is because our bond team was being very generous in terms of giving the city time to develop its program. But I'm assuming that because of the crisis we have, if the bond measure were approved, you would expect that the program would be developed and ready to go. And so if that were the case, if we were ready with our program in terms of how financing was going to work and projects were ready to be financed, our bond team could issue the bonds next year in 2017, and so that payment would actually begin in 2018.
I'm sorry, just one quick clarification, again, Mr. Chair. On the new housing bonds, that's assuming the $1 billion?
Yes, it's
or
assuming, thank you for asking that question, it's assuming $1.1 billion authority. Okay. So with that, I believe we've answered all of the remaining questions. There was one question on cost, and we just wanted to be clear on what the question was, if it was the interest rate or the cost of comparing. It's very hard to compare cost on issuances by municipality because it really depends on the date and even the date you're actually issuing, the exact date. But at this point, just so you know, the interest rate is about 3.5. In our projections, we base it at 5 just to be conservative.
Excellent.
So with that, if there are any questions?
So, yes, thank you. On this chart, really quickly, the total numbers fluctuate. The fluctuation of the total numbers is different than the addition or subtraction of what the amount of new bond would be. I'm assuming that you all calculated the ebb and flow of the other bonds?
Well, it's based on the fact that if you, for example, issue $100 million the first year to finance projects, and the next year you issue another $100 million, then it's basically you're paying for the debt on $200 million, right? So it's additive as you issue more bonds.
Sure.
So that's why you see the changes.
Questions, members? Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and my colleagues for their attention to this important matter. And I've got a question. In addition to building housing, the city has about 10,000 units of housing whose covenants are going to be expiring. About 1,000 of these covenants are in the 9th District. So the question is, can these funds be used to preserve existing affordable housing units?
Unfortunately, and Natalie can correct me if I'm wrong, but unfortunately they couldn't because they would have to be units that the city owned. And with the expiring covenants, we actually do not own any of those units. Those are owned by the developer. With GeoBonds, the city would basically own the units and contract with the developer to build them and manage them. Right. But, I think when you think about other sources that are available, so the existing city sources could focus on preservation, right, if they don't have to focus on new construction. So I think when you think about this, we could think about all of the sources available currently in the city and then potential new sources that we may be receiving from the state or other sources.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This, I think, certainly is worth considering again. And she's right. We need to figure out all the sources, figuring out how we leverage limited resources. But I think the expiring covenants is something that should be on the radar.
So let me add just something that Natalie just reminded me of. So one of the way to address that, if the city wanted to invest in preservation, is the city would have to buy the units in order to rehab the units and extend the affordability.
Okay. With the bonds, with these bond
With
proceeds.
these bonds.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Along those lines, we have a housing gap analysis where we need about 10,000 units of supportive housing over the next 10 years, 9,000 for singles and 1,000 for families. But we also need about 3,000 or so housing for rapid rehousing and bridge housing. So this type of crisis housing, have we thought about if the bond monies can be used for the rapid rehousing needs of the 3,000 or so?
Yes. So in terms of, it depends on how you choose to write the bond language or the ballot language for the bonds. If you choose to dedicate a percentage to permanent supportive housing because that's such a crisis and a priority, and another percentage to other affordability needs, you're able to do that through the bond language.
You look like you're going to say something. Are you just saying hi? Hello? No? Oh, okay.
No, I mean, again, since we would own the projects and we would have a developer who would be building them and managing them, it would be a question of how that management contract would be set up. Would they be set up in a way that they're accepting rapid rehousing, whereas others are accepting permanent supportive housing? I mean, you just need to work out those kinds of projects. But again, with the GEO bonds, the underlying ownership is with the city.
And other bonds that we have issued for various purposes, we've had citizens bond oversight committees. We've also had annual audits. Are those included in the bond language or upfront, or is that a requirement, or how does that? We would have to put in ourselves, right? It's not just an automatic policy or legal requirement, but we would choose to put that in upfront, correct? And
it has been a regular provision in the last several types of bond measures that the council has approved.
Okay. And we've been looking at 10 years. Does it make, have we looked at 15 years, 20 years, and why has the focus been on 10 years? Is that, I mean, our strategic plan is based on 10 years, but can we do bonds for a longer period of time?
So actually, the period you have here, the estimate in the chart, is for 20 years.
That's for 20 years.
Right, and the reason why the payments go up to like the 27th year is because you basically because it's a projection on when you will finish paying the debt.
Yeah, so we could, although our strategic plan has explained to us a need for a 10-year plan, it's based on a 10-year plan, we could submit bonds for longer. If I mean, we don't have to do a 10-year bond, right?
No, it's actually better to do 20 because it's cheaper for the property
It's cheaper
owner
for the bond to do it 20.
Right.
And we would have to adjust that to what our need is and justify what expenditures we would make over 20 years, not 10 years. Or is it just the repayment
Well,
for
it's
20
really
years?
more, so think about it more as projects, right? Because if you issue, you're issuing based on projects annually. So based on the projects that are ready to be financed, that's the amount that you would be issuing annually.
So it's not like a credit card where you buy the product or you build the product in this case in the first 10 years, but hey, I'm going to pay it over 20 years. It's not, doesn't really look that way.
No, it doesn't work that way. You issue the bonds and you start making payments the following year.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And if I could clarify on your previous question, if you desire an oversight committee, that would be a feature of the ballot language. It would not be a requirement of the bond or included in the bond language itself. That's a feature of the ballot language.
Along with the annual audits? Correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a follow-up question. I know that we understand the importance of bricks and mortar, and you made it pretty clear that that's the focus. And so it does not include services that certainly
Right.
should be a part of some supportive housing programs. This is only for the
Only for bricks and
Bricks and mortar.
mortars. We would partner with the county and the housing authority for the operating and the services. That's how you make supportive housing work. You know, usually the city actually, even in our current supportive housing projects, we do not have funding for services or operating costs. We partner with the county and with our housing authority for that part of the funding.
There may
So we're
be,
leveraging our resources, and that's what we want to do. Right?
so effectively, there are other funding sources that you would use for services. GO bonds have a very specific niche that you would be able to use them in, and services is not one of those niches.
And as you reported to us last time, a bond is the most restrictive revenue source. So a sales tax or a tax on marijuana or something like that wouldn't have those kinds of restrictions or barriers to them.
There's much more flexibility if you adopted or put forward a sales tax that was a special tax. You would describe what the special uses are, and they would be dedicated to those uses, but you could use them for services.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on that. I think these are important points, and I think Mr. Senator Price has been grappling with this, much like I have. This is the most restrictive form of financing. It limits us to bricks and mortar, and it's going to require us. I mean, our problem is acute at certain levels with the need for supportive housing. Very, demanding community of people in terms of resources to address those concerns. But the housing crisis is throughout the entire city, throughout the entire society. We need 100,000 units. We're going to come back later on and ask the CAO to drill down more so that we break that down into income categories and know exactly what we're looking for. But this requires us, all of us collectively, to think creatively about how we can take advantage of bricks and mortars and turn a blunt hammer into more like a chisel so that we can utilize these precious resources in ways that we all have this need for, and figure out if we're building, if we're owning, who are our partners, developers, nonprofits, lease agreements, if we do mixed income, right, then how do we parcel out that part that we have some skin in the game on, and then work with others. So I think one of the things for us focused on this is that we need to figure out what's all the pages of flexibility that we have, right? Because if not, we're just going to end up, as the chair was mentioning when we were in Sacramento, bricks and mortar. That's all he's going to get, right? Or we're just going to just have that with a door and some windows and nothing else. And the city deserves more than that, and our populations that we're focused on deserve more than that. So we really have to think about what are all the creative ways that we partner with the private sector, philanthropic sector, nonprofit sector, and other entities, LAUSD for teachers, et cetera, so that we are not just building, but making sure that it's flexible and available for these populations.
Right. So I would say that the the bricks and mortar part gives you flexibility on the affordability range, but I think we also want to think about what we have in terms of existing resources. So if you were going to, just to give you an example, if you're going to focus this funding on supportive housing, then maybe the current resources that we get from the federal government focus on affordable housing, right, all the way to 80% of AMI. And then, of course, figuring out if you want to be able to, in the ballot language, provide a range of affordability, right, how we leverage with what the county's doing, and of course, hopefully with the proposals in the governor's budget and what that means in terms of additional supportive housing sources, right? So I think you think about this as a very long-term investment, and if the language is flexible enough, so depending on the priorities and how we're doing with our homeless count and our services, how that may shift depending on where we are in year 5, right, or year 4, year 10, right? Because our plan is 10 years, but it may take longer than that. But there's always room for assessment, right, and trying to address all of our range of affordability needs.
And even if the GO bond is limited on brick and mortar, you still have a variety and flexibility. We can build in some flexibility on the types of brick and mortar we do. So addressing family housing or veteran housing or youth or permanent supportive housing or general affordability, there is a wider range, and then coupled with some of the concepts in the House LA initiative that gives us maybe a little bit more flexibility in finding the right types of housing based on where we are at any given point in time.
Just following up on something, because I'm concerned about the restrictions of just brick and mortar myself. It's been something I've been concerned with from the beginning. If it's the route we go and we purchase and build something, and on the first floor, in order to activate a street, there was retail. Can the revenue we get from the rent or the lease from the retail operators be used for services, or does that need to repay the bond?
So I will have Natalie answer, but I believe the answer is yes. Any revenue we get from rents.
So there's a 5%
You have to speak
limit.
in the...
So Natalie Brosier's office, Debt Management Group. So on any bond issue, you can spend up to 5% on retail. And one of the things that we talked about was using whatever rent you have for services. So if you have a coffee shop at the bottom or a little grocery store at the bottom, the city is collecting less than 5% of the total bond issue, then you can use that rent and use that for services.
Okay.
The same thing with any rent that you may collect. If you decide that you want to put in affordable housing and people are paying rent based on their income, right, you can take that money, put it aside, and you can use that for vouchers. Right? You cannot use the bond proceeds themselves for the vouchers, but any rent that you collect, you can.
Up to 5% of $1 billion or whatever.
Vouchers is whatever, because that's just you're collecting the rent.
Right.
It's collecting the rent. The retail up to 5% of the square footage.
More flexibility.
Okay. All right.
So you can do a mix of both.
Okay.
And it may be that there could be, and Natalie would be better to answer this question, opportunities for both tax-exempt financing and taxable financing. I don't know if that would be taxable.
So taxable only allows you, is it on? Okay, no wonder. Taxable only applies to certain things. You would do taxable if you wanted to use private use. If you wanted, you could use more private use. Let's say you wanted to put more than 5% on the first level, then you would issue that portion taxable. All right, so let's say you want to put 10% of your square footage or 15% of your square footage on retail, then that 15% you would issue taxable, and the remaining 85% you would issue tax exempt.
Now, I presume that we're not looking at spending this money being the sole source of revenue for a project. Correct?
We have to buy the units. So the way that this would work is because the city has to own the units, we don't have to own the entire, we don't have to pay for all of the units in the project. So we can dedicate a certain number of units to a certain type of housing. And so it depends what the city chooses to do, but we do have to own the units. It doesn't mean we can't leverage with other sources, because we can.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
Yes.
Right, so you could have a complex where you do with a private developer and they build 100 units, let's say, and you decide you want to add on to their development and use GO bonds for an additional 50 units of affordable housing. GO bonds could pay that. But the city has to continue to own those units. They can't sell the units.
I understand that. What I'm thinking of is, and I appreciate that because that I hadn't thought of, is I've seen permanent supportive housing projects built in my district and in other places where it was various fiscal partners who made it happen. So what I heard you talking about was sort of a mixed-use project where we would buy a certain number of affordable units as part of that project. If there's a project that needs various funding sources to be a permanent supportive housing project, how does that work?
Only if we can own the units. So you can participate, like I said, in projects, but at the end of the day, whatever project, whatever units that we are participating in, whatever our percent of equity is, we have to own the units. Yeah. I mean, there's no other way of getting around that.
So we have to be a 100% owner, not a... Of the unit.
Of the unit, right. So like I said before, you could participate in a project, right? But you would have to own the units.
So if we built a project with 2 or 3 other partners, California Community Foundation, Tom Safran, whoever, we would have to basically have a red line saying these are the City of LA-owned units.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I imagine part of the benefit of the bond is being able to leverage other projects and not just build a whole bunch of projects on our own.
So actually, it's, I don't think we want to do that, but if you wanted, so just going back to supportive housing project, right? The only way, as Natalie was saying, the city could either choose to pay for the entire construction of 100 unit supportive housing development or 50 units, but we would be leveraging services and the operating funds, right, to be able to make it a supportive housing project, but we would still have to own either 100 or 50 or 20 units.
All right, I appreciate that. I was envisioning it more as how I thought the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was used, as the ability to leverage a whole bunch of things. It's not that.
You can't do that. You can't do that. You have to pay for the units.
All right, that's an important piece of information.
Right, so the services that you provide there, right, you can put as much services as you want on the first floor with these agencies. You sign these contracts with them, right? They don't have to pay rent. They don't have to do anything because you're already paying the debt service in another way. So you could have as much services as you want on that first floor, right? Because they're providing services to the public. It's a public use, right? So you can have as much as you want there in public services to the people who are in those GO bond paid for units.
That's important to know. Thank you.
Can I follow up on that? So the requirement that the city would have to own the units, that's based on, have other cities done it where they provide the funding to a fund like the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and then that leverages other dollars in the past?
I can't imagine it being GO bonds. We did some investigation on that.
Yeah.
And bond counsel was pretty clear that we have to own the units based on state law. I mean, you could ask the city attorney that question, but
There's some creative ways where the ownership is on paper with the city, but I would imagine whoever we leverage these dollars with, if it's a private developer that leverages the dollars that we have available with other funds and they create new housing, it doesn't have to be the whole structure, but it could be a few of those units that on paper that are city-owned, but are still nonetheless functioning as if it's one whole unit operated by that entity that leveraged the city dollars.
and we agree with that. So
okay.
like I said before, you could have a housing unit, so you have 200 units, correct? And you have your private conduit, your private developer who does affordable housing, build them for you. That's allowed. And at the end of the day, the amount that you put in is the amount of units that you would own. And then you would go back and you would pay that developer, contractor, I don't know what the correct word is for that. They would manage those projects for you, absolutely. But at the end of the day, those units would belong to the city. So the developer would own the 150 units paid for by these other funding sources that you're talking about, Councilman, and the city would own the 50 units on paper, like you said, but this developer, this nonprofit or whatever, would be running the project for you, and that's allowed.
Yes. Got you. One final question, and this is a Mike Bonin question. Bathrooms, standalone bathrooms and voluntary storage bonds, can we pay for those?
As long as a brick and mortar, yes. So you're building a storage facility? Absolutely.
The brick and mortar
wanna-
side of those kinds of facilities.
Right. You're building a warehouse, take a warehouse, you want to put storage in there, that's fine.
Navigation center.
Oh, yeah, you're purchasing one. And I had said that before, that you Councilman, you mentioned the fact that you have these housing units that are expiring, right? You could use your GO bonds to buy those outright and have somebody else run them for you, right? Because remember, it's the acquisition and improvement of real property. That's the state law. That's a quote from state law. So you could acquire those and have somebody else run them for you.
Just a nuance on that.
Okay.
We're very excited to hear that we're now going to have these partnerships with developers. With builders, we won't have to worry about penciling out the affordability side here. That was one thought I had earlier on this retrofit, on the 10,000 units that we have. Right, we need to extend, but what if we used our money to retrofit those facilities?
We have to own them. Anything we retrofit, we have to own.
Okay, so that's a precondition.
Yeah, I can't, unless the city attorney has a different opinion, I can't seem to get away from that with bond
That's
counsel.
okay. But we could retrofit and purchase, right? As one
Correct.
project,
Right.
right? Okay, good. Thank you. Very helpful.
One more question on this. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So after all these arrangements are made and the buildings are built and there's the divvying up, how long is the city required to hold ownership of these properties?
That's a very good question. We've dealt with that question before. I mean, there's an expectation that you're going to hold them for a little while. I think the city attorney is better able to answer that than I am, but if you sell the units before you're done paying the debt service on them, it can become problematic. So let's say you own a building for 10 years, but you have 20 years to pay it off. You would probably have to take those proceeds from selling it and pay off the remaining 10 years.
All right, but that's...
All right, so that's really... until you actually see what it is, it's hard for me to answer that because it's going to be a case-by-case analysis.
So it's case by case, so it's not absolutely ruled out. So I think if there's concern, certainly I would have concern about the city getting into the business of running more housing developments.
So just to be clear, like the city would not be running them, right? The city would have to enter into a contract with the developer to manage them.
Sure.
And when you think about selling them, I think you want to think about a period of affordability, right? It's like how long should these remain affordable, and that's really critical. And so, of course, we would always recommend at least 55 years. And part of the issue with the preservation projects is that they're coming up on that time. And unless the developer is willing to take additional public funds, we can't extend the affordability. So I think you need to think about long term, but the city would not be managing the day-to-day operation of those buildings. I mean, we don't want to become landlords where basically the city's the owner, but the management agreement is with the developer.
You have to look at this the same way when we built the animal shelters and the libraries, for example. This is the same structure as that. So we built these libraries, right? And after 20 years after the bonds are paid off, you could sell that property and convert it to something else, right? Or you could sell that property, and we did that, right? When we were building new libraries, we took the old library property and we sold them and we built new libraries. So this is a GO bond, so those same analysis would apply here. You're not required to keep the property forever, but there is an expectation that you're going to use the property for what you told the voters you were going to use it for.
So,
Makes sense or not, but
so my question is, if you sell to an operator that's going to keep it for 100 years, let's say, affordable for 100 years, I mean, because I think, Mr. Cedillo always raises this point, like we need a lot of different types of housing. And one of the beautiful things about housing is it can switch income levels very easily over time, right? It can go up, it can go down, it can go sideways. So if the city with the bond were to buy land, construct the buildings, and then sell it to an operator who says we're going to operate it for the next 55 years or 100 years, is that outside the bonds? I mean, libraries are a little bit different because the voters are actually expecting fire stations and libraries to be within proximity. Housing has a little bit more elasticity.
it's more difficult. That's a little bit more difficult.
It's a little bit more difficult, and maybe we'll ask the city attorney to come up, but I would assume based on Natalie's earlier response that as long as we've paid off the debt, and then if we wanted to sell to the developer at an affordable rate so that they would keep the units affordable for a certain period of time, I don't see why that would be an issue. Right? And we add a covenant to the property so they keep it affordable for that period of time, that probably would work.
And you also mentioned something that, let's say you decide that you want to use it for affordable housing for X income level, right? And then the city decides, no, they want to make it a different type of affordable housing. That has nothing to do with the bonds. That's a policy decision by the city council. Once it's built, right, you can use it for low income.
Because our only restriction is that it's housing.
That's your restrictions. That's not the bond restriction. I want to make that clear, right?
But
and that can change every year. It depends.
And of course, it depends on the ballot language, right? Whatever that says in terms of how the bonds are going to be used,
right, and
what level of affordability.
Right, and if you want to make sure you have the flexibility to do that, your ballot measure would say you can use the bonds for your program's going to be X, Y, and Z, right? But it can be used for X or Y or Z. You can use it for what you want as long as it's in that ballot measure. So you don't have to use 10% for this and 20% for that. Once it's built, it's a public use. You can use it for, you can switch around depending on how you want your program to be.
But, the challenging part, of course, is that you'll have people living in the units. So that's one of the challenges, right? So in terms of the ballot language, I think you just want to be clear on the parameters for the income levels, right?
You want the ballot measure to reflect your program, but you don't want to restrict yourself so much that you're stuck with that program for the next 20 years when you own the property, right?
Sure. Other questions? Good. So now a couple questions about your report backs. Can you walk us through the again one more time, just so we're super clear about what we can do? So we have two ballots coming out. We have a November ballot and we have a March ballot. What are our possibilities based on the things that you all looked at, all of them? What are our possibilities for November? What are our possibilities for March? And then as a part of that, what deadlines do we have to meet in order to realize those opportunities?
Okay. Well, the bonds, the GEO bond, you can go on either ballot, November or March. So there's no restriction on that. You can go to either ballot with a special tax, which is a 2/3 vote in virtually all of these cases. So sales tax, for example. I think there's one area, the documented transfer tax, where our only option is to go in March. Any general tax has to go on a local ballot, which would be March. So that's just kind of the broad overview. Special taxes can go basically anytime. General taxes only on a local ballot, and GEO bonds can go anytime.
Can you just explain that again about the documentary transfer tax and why it can't be on November?
I will defer to the city attorney on that, if the city attorney could come up and provide some details on that.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Charles Hong, Deputy City Attorney. The reason why the document transfer tax cannot appear on the November ballot is because it has to be a general tax. And as a general tax, it has to appear on a city ballot.
And why the documentary transfer tax is considered a general tax or is not?
It would have to be considered a general tax under the state constitution.
Explain general tax.
A general tax is a tax that can be spent on, to be deposited into the general fund and spent on any general purpose, city purpose, while a special tax is designated for a specific expenditure purpose.
So regardless of the percentage.
So for example, if you had a special tax related to homelessness, the special tax, the funds from that tax that's collected would have to be spent on homelessness. However, a general tax does not have any spending limitations or restrictions. It could be spent on any city needs.
But if you do the documentary transfer tax targeted for homelessness.
Right.
That's
but,
still.
But, so, I mean, but the Constitution, I guess the issue that we're running to, the question it is why can't a documentary transfer tax be a special tax? And the state constitution prohibits us from raising or proposing a documentary transfer tax that's considered a special tax.
The state constitution specifically calls out the documentary transfer tax?
Article 13, section A, 13A, section 4 provides that taxes related to the transfer or sale of property has to be a general tax.
Wow, real estate lobby is really powerful.
Well, they were in 1969 or wherever.
So a documentary transfer tax is a property tax. A property tax can only be a general tax.
Well, it's not a property tax. It's a tax on the sale of property. Right, a property tax is imposed on it's an ad valorem tax that's imposed on the value of property annually. A documentary transfer tax is a tax imposed on the sale of property.
Okay.
Really quickly, are there other categories of either activities or products that cannot be a special tax? So I'm assuming like the sale of candy could be a special tax.
A sales tax can be a special tax.
No.
No, I'm sorry.
Specifically from the sale of candy.
Sale of candy?
Right, because...
Well, if you're specifically targeting only the sale of candy, you're basically discriminating against other products. And as a sales tax, it has to be imposed uniformly to all saleable transactions. Okay. So if you... Sorry.
Mr. Price? Okay. Yes. So I'm asking that because that seems like a very specific particularity.
Right. So if you're trying to impose just a sales tax on the sale of candy, I think we would be limited because to impose a sales tax would have to be imposed on all goods that are subject to sales tax.
Except for property.
Well, property is not a good. It's real. I mean, it's real property. It's not a tangible property.
Okay, got it. Right. I think. So with regard, since you're here, with regard to one of the things I know folks looked at was a marijuana tax, right?
Okay.
Should marijuana be approved for recreational use? What would be your estimation of the constraints around
such? Well, in terms of marijuana, I don't think I'm ready or prepared to discuss that at the moment. I mean, we could always come back and report back, but at the moment, I'm not ready to talk about that.
Wouldn't marijuana fall into the same classification of candy? In terms of putting a different tax on marijuana than you do? No, seriously, over any other product being sold.
I mean, again, I guess in the terms of tangible or intangible, right? Marijuana is a tangible product, and it could be considered, if you want to equate it to candy, or anything else that can be subject to sales tax.
You tax the marijuana and the stuff you eat when you get the munchies, and you
Right.
get a twofer.
That is true. So maybe you don't need the tax. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for City Attorney at all? Members? No?
No, that was a great Socratic method
Yes.
reminder of law school, right? Wasn't it?
Right.
Yes, no, good work. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to go to public comment on this item. So I have a couple dozen cards here. Chris Coe, Irma Vargas, Latrice Cash, and right on cue, Mr. Cedillo's distributing candy, untaxed. Beth Mueller.
Hi, good afternoon. Chris Coe with the United Way. We would be supportive of the movement forward of the housing bond or the general obligation bond with a few things, because we have also been wrestling with the issues of flexibility and timing. So we would present to you, I think it's good that you all are getting the ball moving, and pressure causes other pressure. But by the time you have to finalize the decision later as full council, we would say committing it to supportive housing is an important step, especially to take advantage of other matching funds, whether it's the PSH Acceleration Fund, the De Leon package, the Funders Collaborative Funds, and the impact you'd have to make good on the promise you'd have to do on homelessness to sell the bond. Also, in terms of services, that's a huge need. I do think I would ask you to use this as a leverage point to really negotiate out with the county or within your own services how you would fit that service piece. And finally, to have the package on the affordable side, I think the subsidy goes here. Density, entitlements, permitting should go through the House LA package. So all of that together. So thank you for your work.
Good afternoon, members. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Irma Vargas, and I'm with the Beverly Hills Greater Los Angeles Association of Realtors, and I'm also a member of the California Association of Realtors Affordable Housing Task Force. As you are aware, the realtors have been working very diligently with members of this committee and other council offices, as well as at the state level, since 2014 to find funding solutions to the homelessness issue and workforce housing crisis, both rental and purchase. We have worked in Sacramento to support statewide legislation and locally to support all efforts to increase funding and solutions for homelessness. The realtors recently conducted a poll, which we will be releasing shortly, that indicates very clearly that the voters in the city of Los Angeles will reject any tax on their property, including the documentary transfer tax, parcel tax, and property tax. We are fearful that the council will put an item on the ballot that the voters will not support. The city council should look to seek funding via marijuana tax, billboard tax, or general sales tax, which polling suggests voters will support. This is the second task force that I have been part of, and then the last one was in the 1990s, and we are still in the same position today. Please, let's work together to come up with solutions that really work. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello, committee. My name is Latrice Cash. I'm from Los Angeles. No, that's wrong. I'm from the Church of Nazarene, downtown Skid Row. And, oh my goodness, I'm here because
Can you lower the mic just a little bit?
Down?
Yeah, so it's closer to your mouth.
Oh, child. Okay. We're in here. I'm concerned about the special needed services for the housing for Skid Row. And let's see, for the permanent support of the housing committee, this is what I'm interested in. And what is it, 160047. We would like that on our ballot. God bless you and keep you. Thank you.
Dave Martin, Becky Dennison, Jerry Jones, Steve Renahan, General Jeff, and Tommy Newman.
Up here. Hi. My name is Dave Martin. I've lived on Skid Row for the last 16 years. And although I would benefit from low-income housing, there are people that live on the street that would truly benefit more from supportive housing. That's why I'm asking you to put that measure on the November ballot, because there's a lot of people out there that really need it. You know, I had a friend once, a few years ago, he died, who could have used such support like that, supportive housing. He died from a alcoholic drug overdose, but he was also mentally ill. And I see where such support would be beneficial to a lot of people. Thank you.
Small people up here. Hi, I'm Becky Dennison with Venice Community Housing, and I just want to speak in strong support of the bond measure moving forward. It does sound like you still have some details to work out, and there's time to do that between full council, but I would really urge moving forward quickly. The polling in November does look very strong, and I think that we miss an opportunity if we don't move quickly. I also really do want to urge that we not feel constrained by the bricks and mortar piece. We're going to have to look for other funding streams, there's no doubt about it, but bricks and mortar is our biggest gap. It is where we have the biggest backlog, and that's why we're not producing the units that we need to produce. And so I would also really, really urge that the bond be focused on permanent supportive housing or extremely low-income housing, because in the numbers that Councilmember Huizar put forward, that is where we keep falling further and further behind in production. So I hope you'll move it forward. I hope you'll target it very deeply, and I hope you'll focus it solely on housing. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Jones with the Inner City Law Center. I also want to speak in support of at least a $1 billion bond in November. It's not a total solution. We need money for both housing and services, but this is a critical part. And it's important that we link this to conversations about other long-term sources of revenue on the county level in addition to what the city is doing. There have been 57 agencies over the course of the last year who have been very active, social service provider agencies in this debate and in the budget process. Those agencies have 80,000 volunteers. They have 210,000 donors. We feel that's a big part of the LA electorate, and those are going to be the most impassioned, motivated messengers that will work for this bond in November. So we're anxious to partner with you on this effort. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Steve Renahan. I'm with Shelter Partnership here in Los Angeles. It's well established that permanent supportive housing is the most effective intervention for chronic homelessness, but permanent supportive housing is very expensive to produce, and the scope of our homeless problem greatly outstrips the available resources. So it's an appropriate next step for you to consider this bond measure to produce resources at a level commensurate with the issue. So thank you for your leadership on this issue. Thank you for asking the tough questions today. And thank you for your courage in putting this measure on the ballot to give the people of Los Angeles the opportunity to vote to end homelessness.
Tommy Newman, LA Family Housing. Three things. First, thank you for your leadership on this. Thank you for taking this fight on. A lot of people have shied away from it for a long time, and it's a big deal. Second point, I've been texting with Stephanie, my boss, throughout the course of this. She says, more money, more money, more money, we'll make it work. For the campus that we're breaking ground on next week, we have 14 different funding partners, everyone with their own set of rules, their own set of audits, their own set of requirements, and we figure out how to put them all together and build the project. So if you guys can come up with the money, we'll figure out how to make it work. And then the third point is supportive housing. We are strongly in support of that. You're hearing that elsewhere. We think it most directly connects with the need that voters are seeing on the streets. And that's an argument that we're going to have to make coherently out there. So we want to be talking about the stuff that we're trying to pay for is the stuff that's going to solve a lot of what you're seeing with your eyes. It's also our most acute need, and we know that we can't do it all at once. We need to do it in pieces, and so this is a great place to start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, where's your project? Where's your project going to be?
It's in North Hollywood, Spa 2. It's going to be the regional hub. So it's a service center, a health center, 50 units of permanent supportive housing. It's a great project. Everybody's invited. We'll be breaking ground next Thursday at 11 a.m.
Good luck.
Good afternoon, General Jeff Skid Row. Clearly this item needs to be continued because I can see this committee is not ready to move forward because there are a lot of questions that have been asked. There's a lot more questions that I can see this committee will want to ask, and there needs to be time to digest this. Also, in regards to a new ballot initiative, at this point, me personally, I'm not in support of this because there's already funding that's going towards homelessness that the city is not utilizing to its maximum benefit, and to ask us taxpayers to create another funding pot, there's a lot of concern for that. In addition to that, let's just say it in layman's terms, in regards to the GEO bonds, it takes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to properly address homelessness. And what the GEO bonds discussion is talking about is the peanut butter, but not the jelly. So there's definitely a need for further discussions, and that's why this item needs to be continued. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Beth Mueller. I teach a Bible study in Skid Row, and I am completely in support of your creative activity on mixing bricks and mortar and funding that can provide permanent supportive housing. I want to just kind of juxtapose two communities on the extremes. If we look at, say, we're going to develop a luxury gated community and we're going to house the homeless. You can take bricks and mortar and you can build the most beautiful buildings, and luxury folks will come, right? But they're going to expect pools and golf courses and spas and services, right? They're going to expect services, not just the buildings. If you take the homeless, the chronically homeless, those who have mental illness and substance abuse and addictions and unmedicated and undiagnosed mental illness, and you just put them in the building, it's not going to work. They need services just like everyone else does. They need different kinds of services and not to be in isolation. So I support your creative working with the county as well as the city to find both kinds of funding so we can make the social network that all communities need to survive. And thank you for your work.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for sharing with us at this committee meeting, and thanks for folks who did presentations. It seems like there's still a lot that we need to learn before moving forward, before we can build unity and move forward. So I want to make a few instructions in that regard, and we'll ask for feedback and then a second and a vote on it. We'd ask for an instruction to ask the city attorney to prepare draft language for 4 things: a general obligation bond, quarter-cent sales tax, a marijuana tax, and a billboard tax. And we will ask that this be approved by the Rules Committee, of which Mr. Huizar and I are both members. And we need to get that language back in time enough to make a decision at the earliest deadline, which I believe is in late June, for the November ballot. And with that language, our expectation is that we would get instructions about which ballot it had to go on. It sounds like some have to go on March, some have to go on November. We'll get information about that. In addition to that, we would ask the CAO and CLA to work together to monitor the county proposals that are under consideration now and that will come under consideration in the next month, and also to monitor the state proposals that are under consideration. I know at least one in the Senate and one in the Assembly. And also if there will be a state measure connected to homelessness around marijuana. And lastly, to monitor the progress of the legalization of medical marijuana, which we believe will make it available for taxation. Mr. Bonin?
I think that sounds like a great suggestion, Mr. Chair. I'd move that, although I personally have significant reservations about the sales tax increase on a November ballot. I'm happy to see everything stay on the table. Even though it's for a March ballot, though, just to actually keep everything on the table, could we also ask City Attorney to proceed with drafting language for documentary transfer tax?
Thank you. Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Questions, comments? Mr. Huizar?
Yes, I would. I mean, I think this is an obvious point, but we're requesting that we draft language and all other related necessary actions we need to take to prepare for the November ballot, because it's not just the draft language, but there's other incidentals associated with that we have to prepare. So just to make it clear, I mean, it's probably an obvious request, but just so that we can be clear, it's not just the language, but all the other incidentals to prepare for a November ballot. And I think Mr. Bonin requested for documentary in March. So, thanks.
Also, additionally, with regard to the GO bond, if the city attorney and CAO can work together, and CLA can work together with regard to the size of it, so that we can make sure it is the appropriate size to meet the demand that's put forward in our homelessness strategic plan. Questions, comments?
Councilman, would you like the CLA and CAO to assist the city attorney in the work that they're doing?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Questions, comments?
Just to make sure that that all the scribes incorporate this discussion we had today. It's really important we have the full range, and we're searching for the full flexibility.
Yeah.
Just for the record.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Cedillo. So if that's if you can you read back to us what we're doing, or what was proposed?
I'll give it a shot.
Thank you.
Ask the city attorney with the assistance of the CLA and CAO to draft language for a GO bond, a quarter-cent sales tax, a marijuana tax, a billboard tax, and a documentary transfer tax for either the November or the March ballots. Ask the CLA and CAO to monitor the county and state proposals regarding funding for housing and homelessness, as well as state measures that may be on the ballot on those subject matters, and ensure that we incorporate the issues and concepts that were discussed in the meeting, such as flexibility and leveraging resources and the whole range of issues to make sure that we maximize the city's ability to meet the needs for that have been identified for the housing.
Excellent. Thank you. Second. Without objection, that'll be the order. Where does that leave us with regard to business?
That clears the desk, sir.
Excellent. We're adjourned. Thank you all so much.
I know.